Rolling.
Rolling.
Hello, Ben.
Hey, Ben. How you doing, mate?
I'm good. How you doing?
Yes, I'm good. Thank you very much. Lovely to be hanging with you once again.
Absolutely.
So tell me what you've been up to this week, mate. Anything special? Anything sound related?
Yeah, I actually had a client in last weekend, a good friend of mine, Eric, who has been producing a record with the band, and he's in between spaces at the moment, so wanted to utilise my space to finalise his mixes, utilising my speakers and acoustic treatment. And so it was a good, fun Saturday hanging out with him, dialing in some sounds and making it sound delish.
Nice.
Yes. How
I'm
about
sure
yourself?
he loved using those monitors
Yes.
of yours. That space is a delight to listen to.
It's a lot of fun for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, sweet.
So
Myself, I've just started working on a feature film, which I may reveal more details as the episodes go on, but at the moment it's called Love Mountain.
Ooh.
And it's by a crew in the US, and they reached out to me through my because of my YouTube channel and stuff, and they asked if I wanted to be a part of it, which is pretty rare, as in I think a lot of the times, because my YouTube channel is educating people in what I do, that my audience are my competitors, not my, not my potential clients. So it's exciting that, I'm getting some work because of what I'm putting up there. But it's shot beautifully. It's a, heartwarming story. And I've got one of my crew that I worked on, Godless, the last feature film I did. I've got him doing some Foley. So my budget's very humble, but it's good. So I'm smashing that one out over the next month and a bit.
Nice.
So mostly for me, it'll be dialogue editing, maybe a few sounds here and there, but then mostly mixing once the dialogue's done, bringing in the Foley from the other crew.
Nice.
But yeah, happy to give you more details on that as it progresses. But for now, that's a cheeky teaser.
Ooh, cheeky teaser. Love it. Well, that actually is a great segue to the topic of today, because we had an email from one of our listeners asking about sound in films. And she was watching a show the other day, and she realised it never occurred to her that the sounds that she was hearing in the show aren't actually all there when they're filming it. So obviously she knew there would be some type of sound team involved with recording it, but it's often that a lot of the sounds that you're hearing in the final product weren't recorded at the time they were recording the scene and added in later by a team of wizards.
And so did our listener discover this mostly because of our conversations? Is that what kind of brought them or made them aware that the sound isn't, or most of the sounds replaced? I think
that's
it'd be
right,
interesting to do. I wonder if we can do polls on, I think on Spotify, but maybe we should do a poll. Maybe down the line we could do a poll and find out how many of our audience knows how much has been replaced when it comes to films and TV, because I think they'd be surprised. Obviously, films tend to be a lot more than TV. Like TV, a lot of the times for budget's sake, they've got to use a lot of the sound that's captured on set. But, these days TV budgets are getting up there and the quality is as well. So
I feel like TV shows pretty well feel the quality of what big movies felt back in the day. Because you're right, the teams getting involved with TV shows and the budgets that these studios are putting forward are facilitating a really great product. Well,
and that's the thing. That's the thing with like Netflix these days. I'd say like some of the movies, the TV shows that I'm watching, just feels like I'm watching a 10-hour movie, right? Like because the quality, you obviously sometimes you'll have your short stories within each episode, but it tends to be like they just carry on from one from the next. So it's like just watching a 10-hour movie of quality and great story and character arcs and stuff. So.
I love TV shows. I used to watch a lot of movies and never really get too stuck into TV shows. And I think it was the Netflix thing that the streaming services that changed that for me. But I really enjoy staying with a story for longer and learning more character development and story arcs. And whereas I always felt that movies would chop out too much, or they would skip too much, or they would just finish the movie really quickly. There'd be this really long journey, and then it's all done. and then we're all done.
Yeah.
But with TV shows, they can really milk that and pivot to all these different storylines. But focusing on sound, the sound team. So maybe we should talk about the sound team and who's involved and why there's so many people and what makes everything that we hear when we're watching a TV show or film. So
yeah, sounds good. I'm happy to learn from each other and maybe educate some others while we chat about it.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So what does a sound team do in a film, Ben?
That's a very difficult question.
It's thrown out there with the big
they do the sound, mate.
questions to start. Yeah.
They're a team of people who do the sound. Well, I think let's start by talking about the process of, let's be specific to a film. Obviously, TV, this stuff will apply, but let's be specific to films. All right. So a film consists of pre-production, production, and then post-production. So pre-production is the writing of the scripts, the picking of the cast. What else do they do? They start making sets and props and all that stuff. The planning, insurance, whatever, all that sort of stuff is done. Storyboarding, all that sort of stuff's done in pre-production. Production is where you film. So that's a pretty obvious one. So you're on set, you're doing all your filming. Then post-production is everything after principal filming, which is you'll do your edit. So you'll edit the picture. You'll do color grade, which is a skill that not everyone knows about. So this is where people match the camera shots, or they might do effects, turn a shot from day to night, or, they used to do that back in the day a lot more.
Is that like adding an Instagram filter on your picture?
That is the best way to explain it to layman's, or that's the best layman's term for it, is just putting a filter on it. So I would say that's the creative side of it. So the correction part is making sure everyone's skin tones look correct and that all the shots are lit the same, because people may not know, but when you're out filming and, the sun changes, or you're moving around shooting different spots and locations and different angles, and everything changes and your camera settings might be changed. So, on certain sets, they might be very good at making sure this is as close as possible every time, but sometimes a shot just might be darker. And so they need to lift that shot, or the shadows aren't dark enough because they want it to be real moody for a horror film. So they'll drop the shadows. But, like you think of The Matrix. So color grading, obviously we're diving into visuals, but it's important. So something like The Matrix, they wanted The Matrix to be more green because it went with that, the text. So they put that green hue on everything, right? So, and some of that was choice by like color clothes and things like that, but that was obviously added in post-production. So there's color grading, which is that, and then there is like visual effects. So these days, lots of CGI, things like that. And then obviously there's the sound team, which is post-production. So sound in that three phases, although pre-production, depending on the budget, there'll be sound involved. So maybe the composer gets brought on and they might start writing ideas to go. So when they get to the edit stage, they've already got some score to work with. The sound team, if it's so most of this is when there's big budget. So the sound team will be brought on. So the sound editors or sound designers will go out and start recording sounds for the film. So they'll obviously have the script. They'll know what's going to be in the film, and they might start going out, or it might be creatures. They might have a dragon, so they know to go out and record certain animal sounds that they can turn to a dragon. So pre-production, tends to only be involvement on a bigger budget. So for production, so second phase of the film.
And that's when you're actually filming the scenes with the actors.
Yep. So, and you'll tend to then have sometimes multiple boom operators. So everyone knows
a boom? Tell us what a boom is.
The boom operator is the guy that stands there with the pole, the boom, and it has a microphone on the end of it, and they'll point it where it needs to go. But they might hide mics, so they'll hide microphones on set. So if you're in a car, they like to hide a microphone in the visor of the car, or they put a lapel. So a lapel or a lavalier mic is the one that you'll see in a newscast, and they have it on their shirt. But their skill is hiding it and
While
they'll
trying to
hide
make
it
it
on,
sound good
on
as
the
well.
costume. Yeah, see, that's the key as well. Is, you know, the good thing for news is they don't care about seeing it, so they'll clip it right where it sounds great. It won't get any clothes shuffling, or think of like a suit of armor and it's making noise and stuff. You can't have chain mail all through your dialogue track, otherwise you can't use it. So
you say
there's
medieval shows are an audio challenge.
doomed. Yeah. Well, I don't think, other than I remember it was at Lord of the Rings, they had two people who their job for 3 years or something, 4 years, was just to make chainmail. They literally lost their fingertips from making, it was plastic chainmail, but they just made chainmail the whole time. But, you know, so there are those issues. And honestly, one of my biggest pet peeves as a post sound guy is lapel mics not sounding great, because there's techniques on how to hide it. Like a lot of shows, so like Suits, where they're literally wearing suits, they hide it in the tie knot. So you'll see, which interestingly, I used to watch shows and I'd be like, how do they get that cool, you know, with a tie where you tie a knot, and they always have this like cool, and it grooves in, you'll see it kind of has this middle crease. I always thought that was just a cool technique to do your tie, but it's mostly because the microphone's in there in the dip. And I don't know, I just thought it was a tricky technique to do your tie with this cool, I thought it was a style thing.
Yeah.
But it was because the mic's always there. So as I said, there's great ways to hide mics, and that is the role of maybe not the boom operator. There's a sound recordist. So the sound recordist would be probably like more the head sound guy on set, and they're the ones that will be either they'll have their own little cart, or they might be in a truck, and all the mics get sent to them and they mix on set. So they'll kind of do a live mix of the dialogue, mix the boom and the lapel mics. Just mostly these days, that technique isn't, they more monitor to make sure that this mics sound great and they're not clipping, which is distortion, where you've got your mic too loud. So they'll do that kind of stuff and make sure the recording's going to be great. But they do a mix, and then what happens is what we call rushes. So they might do a quick edit of the film just to check that everything's okay, that all the quality's there, and they'll have mixed to a degree the sound, so that if a director's watching the scene back or they're cutting the scene, they've got something to listen to that's kind of pre-mixed and doesn't have all the individual sound files. So what a sound recordist is also, what they do is record all the tracks. So the two booms, it tends to be two booms, all the lapels are on single tracks, so that when they get to me or the post mixer, I have all the what is called isolated tracks, and it means I can then mix whatever mic I want on.
So you listen, so you get the scene and you watch it, and you can just listen through the microphones and decide what's the best capture of what I need here. So you might use,
because that's stage 3.
I won't get ahead of myself.
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. That's right.
But in production, they're recording all the channels that you'll later use, and you might not use them all.
Yeah. Yeah, which it's interesting, because I've read a lot of stuff where like sound recorders get a bit, a bit sensitive, because as mixers, we don't use their mix that they did on set and stuff. But to be honest, there's so many issues. So I'm going to get even more technical. There can be issues between the microphones. So the mic on the lapel and say the boom mic, you can get a thing where they phase each other out. And it's basically the shortest version is the time difference between the sound, my voice going to that mic, and the other mic is out. It's different. And so what happens is
I'm going to draw a picture while you talk about this to help the viewers.
So what happens is the sound travels to both mics separately, but when they record, they're in sync. But the time difference makes them do a weird sound. And look, I'm probably losing people, so we won't harp on it too long. But basically, you can't always use both mics all the time. And so sometimes their mixes won't be clean. It's not going to be in focus, and
it's a bit too bright.
Yeah, so you can see the waves. Think of two waves, going like that. Yeah. And if they cross each other the wrong way, they phase each other out, and then the sound might go thin, so you lose all the bass. Yeah, that's good. Sorry, we're getting too technical here.
But to quickly describe this picture, we have one microphone, another microphone, This is the waveform moving
sound
through
waves,
time.
yep.
And as the waveform goes down, the other microphone goes up and it cancels the energy out, leaving the sound sounding thin.
Thin, yes.
All right.
And so, that can be an issue. There's lots of reasons why you wouldn't use the mix from the sound recordist. But anyway, so the sound recordists, though, their main job and what they should do well, and a lot of them do, is just make sure the audio is all coming in clean. Every channel. I sometimes have issues where sound recordists on my films focus solely on listening to the boom mic and they don't listen to the lapel. And then there's a scene where it's a wide shot and you can't get the boom in close. So the boom has to be always out of shot. You don't want to see a boom pole sticking in your shot. And so it's a wide shot where they're probably, 10 meters away and their boom doesn't reach that far. And so you have to use the lapel mic, but they haven't concentrated on it. And you just hear this shh, 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 shh as the person's walking and their shirt's rubbing on the mic. And it's devastating because then I don't have either option, right?
And we'll talk about what you have to do to fix that in a minute.
Good one. Yeah.
So
anyway,
I want to ask a question
Please.
because we're watching a scene or we're filming a scene and there's two actors on set and we might have a boom swinger, as you mentioned, person with the pole moving the mic around to capture the dialogue. And there's a scene, sometimes in smaller budgets, you might only have one boom swinger, and in bigger budgets, you might have a couple of boom swingers. So in a scenario where it's a smaller budget show, the boom swinger obviously has to know when to move the mic between the characters as well to try and to not miss any lines, because I imagine if the mic is pointing at character one while character two speaking, it's probably not going to sound that good.
No, it doesn't. That is a big issue a lot of the time. So there's lots of things that can happen here. So if they're a good boom operator and they know the script well, which I'd say, if you're a good boom operator or you want to be good at your job, you should know the script so you can follow. Sometimes it'll be like you'll have enough time where they might be practicing the scene for the camera, and so you might be able to pick up the scene and know where to move the mic. So that's kind of helpful. But to be honest, the best people would know the script. But at the end of the day, that's not always an option. So obviously the two mic thing works. Sometimes then you have to also think, so if it's two people sitting across from each other at the table, you can put it in between and it should sound good enough for both. Really? You might turn it a little bit, but it depends the scene and the setting, but that's not always ideal and you do have to move the mic around. Another technique that is used a bit is so you'll do the reverse, what is called the reverse camera. So let's just say we're doing a scene for a movie now. We've got my shot, which is my main camera, and you might be the, what we call this, the dirty shot, where your shoulder is in the corner. So let's just say that's Ben's shoulder in the corner of my shot, although it depends how we crop this video, but your shoulder's there so people know that I'm talking to you, and that's my main shot. And so the boom is, they tend to just leave the boom on me, right? So for this scene, they'll leave it on me and then we go the reverse and it's your shot. So we shoot your part of the conversation and my shoulder might be in your shot, but the boom, because your face is in the shot, I'll put the boom on you, right? And so when I get an edit, it's great because you get a nice clean sound of that one person, no mistakes, the boom's not moving around. But what directors love to do is sometimes have you, so I might be talking to you and they'll cut to you doing a response, doing something.
That looks like how I act, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly you. Every time I say something great, you're like, it's amazing. Yeah. So you'll get a response, but then they change the shot and sometimes or alternatively, it might be like you'll respond to me, but they don't change the shot and they use the sound from that shot. Does this make sense? Which is on me. So if the mic, I've said, how are you going, Ben? And they stay on me, but you say, I'm good, because it's so short. You don't want to cut to you just for the I'm good, but the boom is on me. And so it doesn't sound good for you, but they'll leave that audio in. And so if I don't get the raw files, I may never get that response from you as a clean audio. Or alternatively, they might like the take where you say, I'm good, but it's off mic. And every other take you said, oh, I'm okay, or I'm whatever, and they don't like the response, or your delivery was the best on that off-camera one.
So directors and editors might choose a piece of edit or a piece of snippet of footage with audio attached based on a performance element, even if the audio isn't amazing.
Yeah.
And then you have, you as a sound mixer has to deal with that.
So sometimes I can convince them to use a different take that is clear, or maybe because it's off camera, you can use ADR, and which we'll talk about ADR and you know, make it sound great. But I feel like I'm giving you a big vomit of information, and hopefully some of this is sinking in. But so anyway, the issue there, I guess, is that if you don't have multiple boom operators, you can't have good coverage all the time, and there are going to be those mistakes. And so lower budget films, you're required to do stuff in post-production to fix mistakes that you couldn't capture on set. So as we said, bigger films may have multiple boom swingers, and the chances of missing stuff is obviously a lot slimmer. So should we move on to post-production then? Is that a good segue, or do you think I've missed
It's a good segue, but I think you've missed a few things. And what I'd love to add in is that in addition to recording the dialogue while they're filming on set, it's often that you will record wild tracks and sound effects and atmoses on location. Well, if you've got a good team, hopefully they're doing this.
So wild takes, as you suggest. Do you want to explain what they are? Or
no,
do
you can explain it, and I'll just add a few bits and pieces as you go.
Yeah, so wild takes, if you've got a great sound team, and in the past I've had a few guys that have just nailed this for me, is so wild takes is you'll get the actor to, particularly for, the scenario I said before about the wide shot. So someone might be walking into the room, you have a wide shot of them walking in the room, and they might say, hey, Ben, how you going? Obviously, people don't greet people in films because that would be a waste of dialogue. But
I
walk in the room, hey, Ben, how you going?
In films?
No, and on phones. And it's actually one thing that I've always wanted to do, because you watch in shows, because it's a waste of time, right? And so if they're on the phone, they never say, all right, see you later. But I don't know if it's an Australian thing.
Interesting. I might embrace that in real life and just see if that's well, we say goodbye about 4 times before we actually leave.
That's I was going to say that. My dad, if I call my dad, he'll say, all right, bye, see ya. All right, go, see ya, have a good one, bye. And you're like, one was enough. Even that, I'm like, conversation finished, great, boom. And I wanted to actually, after watching lots of TV, I was like, I'm just going to start going, and I did it at work. That was one thing I did at work, because I was like, you'll see them walk in the room 5 minutes later and talk about something else. So this is an old job. I'd just be like, oh, have you got that thing? No, okay. And just hang up on them. And they never picked me up on it. This is because I was in a small team and stuff. But it was one of those things I'm just like, why would I say, all right, see you soon, or, see you later? Because most chances are they'll come in 5 minutes later and ask for something else or whatever. It just seems odd.
That's funny. I'm going to notice that next time I watch a film and someone's on the phone if they greet each other, because I don't think I'm going to ever unsee that or unhear that if they.
Yeah. So have you seen The Room? There's that cult film, The Room.
I'm not
it's
sure.
It's a guy with the long hair. Oh, mate. You have to see it. It's literally got a cult following around the world. This guy who can't act wrote a story that's awful. He literally travels the world.
You're really selling it.
But you got to see it. It's like it's become a cult film because it's so bad. People love it, right? So you can screen it here in one of our smaller cinemas. They play it like they almost do it, or they were doing it monthly or something. And people have props and they go and throw things at the screen, and they do different things and call stuff out, because people will go and watch it constantly. And I went through a phase where me and my mates in every New Year's, we'd watch it. But it's terrible, right? Please watch The Room. And anyone listening, watch it. But so as a guy who had lots of money, he made millions in business and wanted to be an actor. So no one would pick him for their films because he's terrible. So he wrote his own story, and he spent all this money making this film that is dreadful. And it's actually who did they did a spoof film of it, or like it's almost like a mockumentary. No, it's not a mockumentary because it's like a film about it. Franco. Who's Franco? Who's that actor?
James
Franco. He's in the movie that they basically so one of the actors wrote a book about this movie, and then they did a film about this film being made. Anyway, I digress.
Story inception.
But then, so this film though, they greet each other all the time. So they walk in, they're like, "Hi, so and so, whatever," and it's odd. Like they do it at the start and end of every scene. They say hi and bye, and it feels so weird. So it's just that thing that people don't do it
All right,
anymore.
I'm gonna
But anyway,
that.
so I walk into the scene. Let's go back. I walk into the scene. I'm like, "Hi, Ben," and it's a wide shot. And then I sit down, and they've got a close up of me sitting down. We're chatting, right? So that
we're
wide
talking
shot,
about a wild track here.
Yeah. I'm getting there. I remembered where we were at.
Oh, good.
So you might not be able to get the boom in because it's wide. My lapel may have sounded okay, but just as a safety, we do what's called a wild take or wild track. And what happens is after the scene's been shot, and this is time permits because it's notoriously known that on sets, no one cares about the sound team. They don't take time for the sound team. Like a lighting team can take 3 hours to light a set. And if the sound team go, "Can I just get 30 seconds of silence of the room tone?" They're like, "Nah, we got to move on." It's just weird, but obviously everyone deems lighting and stuff
Light's
very important. Yeah. So, but what happens is a wild take, you'll have the sound guy will just take you, over there, or you might be in the same spot so the sound's the same, and they'll literally put the mic where it should be to be consistent, just over your head and get you to say the take. So it might have been, "Oh, hi, Ben," and I'll go, "Oh, hi, Ben. Oh, hi, Ben," and do different versions of it so that I can then, as a post guy, get that sound, find the one that's best sorted or best take, best in sync, and use that audio. So I get that consistent boom audio. The other thing that they'll do is the sound team will try, and again, the better sound guys that I've worked with will use the props on set in the location that they were. So maybe you're in this cool house that's creaky as, and the doors sound awesome and it's good for a haunted house or something. They'll go and actually record those doors in that space.
Oh yeah, just closing them and
and so
stuff.
A film, it was called Living Space. It's now called Nazi Undead because Americans love to be more direct with their film names.
Yeah,
but
right.
there was this horror film, there was a rocking horse and it was metal. And at one point in the scene, it's rocking in the room. It's very scary.
Very scary.
On its own. But they actually went and got that horse. And when no one was, at the end of the day or whatever, they went and got the rocking horse and they actually shook it about or, had it rocking because it made the best weird squeaky sound. And it, like on the wood, it just sounded amazing. It almost had a bit of resonance, like a tone to it that was perfect. So they recorded it, and then I didn't have to go out and find a sound that worked because that was the sound. And in the space, it just sounded great, had the reverb, it was beautiful. And those guys, actually that team were awesome because they went and did all that kind of stuff all the time. They were getting doors and light switches, and there was a projector they had in an old projector, like a reel-to-reel projector, and they recorded all that as well. So you could hear the fan, the internal fan and the things rotating. And they did everything down to like let the tape roll to the end. They did they captured all that stuff. And it was awesome because it all
saves a
fit
lot
with
of
the
time,
movie.
doesn't it, as well? Because we're about to jump into post, but when you these sounds are collected in the environment that is actually being filmed, it saves you hours of sorting through sound libraries to try and find something that fits, because it does fit.
Yeah.
Because it is the thing that you're watching. It just
does fit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's got the reverb of the room. It's in the right space. It is the actual projector. I don't have to go out and sort through libraries of old projectors. Can you hear Bonbon snoring?
No, I can't.
My dog's snoring. I'm pretty sure he is. But anyway, so yeah, I don't have access to really old projectors. I'd have to go find a place that might have them and get permission to go and record them, and they may not work. You can't turn them on. There's so many factors. So it doesn't take lots of work for the sound team at the end of the day to take half an hour, and it wouldn't take more than that to record stuff that is there, where it could take me a whole day to like do research, find a place that has these projectors, if they work, got to go there, got to record them, you know, and time it well, you know, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it definitely helps when you've got a great sound team to capture all that stuff. And even things like just ambiences and stuff. I know a lot of the times I might replace them, but if they are in a great location, you know, on set, if they can get those ambiences and room tones.
And when we talk
really
about ambiences and room tones, what we're talking about is, say you're in a park and the scene's set out in a park, they'll get everyone, the crew and the talent, to be quiet, and the sound team will record the environment.
Yeah.
So that once the post team does any cleaning and stuff that they need for the dialogue, they can then add back in the environment and control it a bit better. So
correct.
It feels believable. Now, before we jump onto post, maybe give me a couple of examples of the sound challenges that happen on set that you have to address in post. So obviously sometimes filming on location, you can't control everything. I know that sometimes filming near traffic can be quite difficult, aeroplanes and helicopters and birds, and there can be a lot of challenges when it comes to the sound side of things that the post team need to do their best to address in post-production. But give me a few examples of some of those locations, challenges.
Some examples of challenges that aren't in a sound recorder's control. You know, as you said, traffic. So, you know, sometimes the location. So I did a film, actually one of our mates, Luke, we did his film, and he was in a Melbourne cafe in the, like, you know, one of the busiest streets in Melbourne, and there were trams. So we have trams in Melbourne, and they're loud. They rumble the street as they come down. They, you know, ding, ding, you know, all these things that you can't control. And, you know, it's unfortunate when the shot doesn't show the window and you can't see them passing. That's just noise that it's unavoidable. You could pick a better cafe, but for him, it was a low budget film. He had a friend who worked at the cafe or whatever it was, and so he had access to it. So you can't avoid that situation. Things you can avoid are things like, well, actually, I was going to say you can avoid this, but they had fridges and they didn't turn them off. But I'm pretty sure that Luke told me that they weren't allowed to turn them off. So that's a bit out of your control. So things like that can be an issue. Honestly, like big budget films, sets can be really difficult because they have lots of fans and other stuff going. So there could be like fans in lighting and things like that, but they might have literally a superhero with their cape flapping in the wind and they've got a big fan blowing at them. You know, I think
that's less than ideal for a sound.
It's less than ideal, yeah. We talked about like Tron Legacy some eps ago where, you know, their suits, because they had these LED lights in their suits, as the two suits came together. So if one person went close to another, there's like a weird electrical force field that made the mics get this weird buzz, and it would change in pitch as they got closer and further away. And so not only did they have to correct that buzz, they had to almost manually do it because it would change pitch all the time. And so they couldn't just like, you know, maybe EQ that frequency out or whatever it was. So there's issues like that.
Cicadas, some things nighttime cicadas can be really challenging, can't they?
Yeah. And look, we tend to add them all in anyway because they add to the vibe of a farmland or nighttime. Cicadas are great. But if they're in your dialogue track, you know, you want to try and clean them out first so you have the power of leveling them, you know.
You can decide how much or how little you want.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I would say is avoidable, but a lot of sound guys don't think about, well, there's two things. One's the reverb of rooms. So when you're in a room that has nothing on the walls, you might be in a small bedroom, and the, you know, everything reverberates. You know, when someone's talking, it's as, you know, big and boomy, or
echoey.
A small room would be big and boomy, but it would be just echoey. And sometimes, you know, a small room's not an issue. Maybe a bigger room is, but if you don't have any treatment on the walls, you know, where some film sets, they soundproof them so they just don't have issues with that. But you, especially small budgets, you don't have that luxury. But one trick that sound people can do, and some lighting guys are actually great at this and they have them in their bags, but you get moving blankets. So they're like almost
the thick,
like
fluffy
we call them a doona. Yeah, thick, fluffy blanket. and you just hang them on some lighting stands, wherever you don't have lights or whatever, and that'll just stop it. And also even on the floor. So if you've got a hardwood floor, if all your walls are plasterboard or whatever you use in America, and the wood floor, that's just going to bounce. Sound will bounce up and down and side to side. So by putting them on the floor, that'll stop, any issue there. And that also helps with footsteps. So one thing that frustrates me is footsteps in a scene. So you might have someone who walks on a hardwood floor and is talking at the same time, and you have these clunking footsteps in like key moments. So they might be saying a certain syllable or something, and the footstep is so loud and dominant that you don't get the whatever it is that they're saying, right? And so on set, good sound guys will have either some rubber stuff they can stick on shoes, or they might even take their shoes off. So if you can't see the shoes in the scene, they don't need to be wearing them unless it's heels and they need to be a certain height. But more importantly, you can get rubber pads and stuff. You just literally stick underneath the shoe and that'll stop them clunking about, or you'll put a mat down. A moving mat would be slippery, so that's a safety issue, so you can't use that. But you might have some carpet or something that you just put down just for that one shot where you don't see the floor. But if it's a wide shot and you've got footsteps, you got to deal with it. But that's where wild takes and things also help. All lapel mics tend to be a little bit cleaner than a boom. But one thing to note is that I'm always going to choose the boom over lapels unless I have to.
Why is that?
The boom, it always sounds more natural and more full. A lapel, because also where it's hidden, sometimes can be quite honky or just not pleasant, and you have to do a lot more treatment to it to make it sound good. And
it's interesting you say that,
sound
because I often think about mic placement, about capturing the best tonal qualities of a voice as well. And I think a lapel mic on the chest area is often facing chest and up, facing the nose cavities, whereas the boom mic is often above and pointing down, which is passing the voice and capturing the chestiness. So I feel like the nicer tone comes from the chest and the nasally tones come from the nose. So by having a microphone above you facing down, you're focusing the dialogue on the chestiness, the warmth or the bigness. And by having something underneath or closer and pointing up, you can get more nasal. And that's also a great trick if you're recording a vocalist in a music environment, is this tilting the microphone, having it a bit higher and tilting down gets a lot of the body out, versus having the mic too low and tilting it backwards brings out a lot of the nose sounds, which can be undesirable. So
I love that.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of challenges on set that can be happen. So let's move into post-production. So the sound, they've finished filming everything. The editors have all the footage and they synchronize all the audio to their footage and start editing the film with the director. So what happens now for the sound team?
So once they have picture lock, which is not a thing as much anymore. They call it picture lock, is literally they've locked the edit. So they've edited their film. They're not going to make any more changes. That's a thing of the past.
They always do make changes though, don't they?
And it's getting more and more crazy these days, because they always want to just recut the film, or they go and show a small audience and they don't like it, so they go and change it. But what is technically picture lock, I have the luxury mostly of the films don't tend to have time or budget that I work on to make changes after the fact, unless it's, a drastic mistake. But picture lock, they'll send me, so they export a file from their editing software that I can input into my software that I use to do all my work, and I will then get all the individual tracks. So if they're a good editor, they'll split everything out quite a lot. So, each person's lapel and the booms will all be on separate audio tracks. They might have sound effects that the sound team recorded, or ambiences or room tone. So that's just the sound of the room that the mic picks up.
Yep.
And they'll have them all as separate tracks. And then even depending on how the composer's going, sometimes the composer hasn't finished. So they might have some temp tracks, which is temporary tracks, which are tracks that they've just stolen from other films to get the vibe of
It's almost like music guides.
Yeah,
So,
guide.
yeah.
And they use it to maybe get the tempo so they could cut the picture, the sound, and then the composer says use the same tempo and stuff like that. Or the score's already done and they've already got that into the edit. And so I'll get all those files separately, or alternatively, the composer then sends them to me later on, and they'll send me, if I am lucky, they'll send me what we call stems or the individual tracks. So I'll get all the individual instruments, or at least in food groups. So you might have percussion and brass and piano all on separate tracks. So I have more flexibility when mixing. We can talk about that a bit more later.
And how many tracks across all of these different things, between the dialogue and all the effects and stuff that they would provide you, the music and things that come over for the editor, how many tracks do you normally see come to you to start with?
It varies. So the recent film that I talked about at the start, they only had 4 tracks of dialogue, 2 tracks of like sound effect, or 3 tracks of sound effects and some room tone, and then 2 stereo tracks for music. So they're just using tracks they've sourced and stuff, which is small because they didn't split everything out. So a lot of the audio is on the same track, which is fine because when I organize my own projects, I just move things into the tracks that I want. So each actor has their own tracks. They had a lot of ADR, which we'll talk about, which is post-recorded in a studio. A lot of people would probably know what ADR is, maybe not.
Yeah, maybe just touch on that. ADR stands for what?
What did you call it the other day? Because didn't I get it wrong?
Well, one of us got it wrong, but I'm not completely confident.
Didn't I say automated dialogue replacement?
That's what you said. I thought it was additional dialogue recording, but
I'm going to Google it because I want to know.
We're going to find out. But essentially is when sometimes actors need to be brought back into the studio after the filming to repeat some of the lines of dialogue because either the director and editor didn't like the performance that was done on the day, on the tone of the voice, or there was a problem with the sound that they need to fix. So they'll come back in and they'll watch themselves play out the scene.
Yes. Right.
You're right. I'm wrong.
Automated dialogue replacement.
There you go.
And I think it was because of the process. You do. I think it's because of the process back in the day of how it was done. So a lot of old movies, like you watch James Bond and stuff like that, they used it all the time because back then it was a lot easier, in the studio, I think, than recording stuff on set. So ADR is automated dialogue replacement, and that's basically where you get someone in the studio, stick a mic in front of them, and they perform the part in a clean situation where there's no background noise. I think there's a famous shot of who's the Australian guy who plays Wolverine? Everyone loves him. Australian actor, Wolverine. What's his face? Hugh Jackman. So Hugh Jackman, there's this some footage going around online where it's him in the studio going, and he's just acting out the noises of him being Wolverine and running, chasing someone and slicing them up.
Yeah.
And so, that's not dialogue, but that's the same thing. So you're in a room where you might just replace lines of dialogue, and it's quite tricky to perform that in sync really well. There's ways to fix that and plugins to help you time things, but performance-wise, some actors are awesome at it and others aren't. And so they might not give you the same delivery. And there's some directors hate it and just refuse to use it, and others don't mind. But
I
it's
think
one of those things.
What rubs them up the wrong way about ADR is that sometimes they like to be authentic to the capturing of the energy that was done on set.
Yeah.
And they don't want to break that energy in post. But sometimes it's inevitable. Sometimes you need it, don't you?
And honestly, sometimes it works because you can get a better performance out of the actor, or sometimes they use it because some actors are really bad at their accents and they might stuff a word or two, and so they have to redo it because their accent isn't convincing in that line. That's ADR.
I worked on a sci-fi film many years ago, and we had a scene set in the future when everyone was on a spaceship and the spaceship was under attack, and there was the props and department were grinding metal off camera, so sparks were flying everywhere as this ship was under attack. So there was fans and there was grinding metal and all of these sounds. So obviously the recording of audio on the day was completely useless for what the scene was going to be. So what they decided to do is that all the scenes that were set in the future were all ADR'd so that it would be consistent. And then all the scenes that were filmed in the real present time, which was in a house, was captured on location and stuff.
Yeah,
and
nice.
That worked out really well because you had this very clean, controllable sound when we're in the future, but you had this really organic sound for these emotional scenes where those subtle quirks of an actor, those little vocal twitches and stuff on emotional scenes were captured and stuff like that. So that worked really well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So where were we in the process?
So you've imported
organizing
your files.
tracks. So I will get all the audio tracks from the editor, and then I organize them how I want, as I said. And what the first process really is for me, the first process once I've organized my session is a spotting session. And a spotting session is basically just playing through the project, and in my software I can add markers, and a marker is just a marker, and I can put information. So I might say, Foley, you need footsteps here, or ambience, this is the ambience we want here, or add this sound effect here. Or it might be for me just to know that I've got to find a different bit of dialogue from here, or whatever it might be. So I'll do a spotting session, and that's something that I can share with my sound team. So I should probably talk, because we're doing more specific to me and my process, but I think let's overall talk about the team in the post-production process. So you'll have a dialogue editor. Obviously, bigger budgets, basically everyone does their individual tasks. So you'll have a dialogue editor, maybe multiples. Some films will have a handful of them. Dialogue editor, there'll be an ADR recordist, so someone who records, but there may be even like an assistant in there or someone who sets up the mic, and obviously the director's in the room, but there'll be an ADR recordist, there'll be an ADR editor. They may be the same person, but they might not be, and that person might work on syncing it up. They might pick the best take with the director and they'll sync it up, and they might even, just do things like fade ins and outs and clean it all up and all that sort of stuff. There will be, so a part of the sort of sound effects team is you'll have Foley team. So there'll be a Foley recordist.
And what's Foley for the people who don't know?
Is named after Sir Foley, I don't know, Mr. Foley.
Was it really? Was it a name?
I'm pretty sure it was based
cool.
off the guy.
I wasn't aware of that.
Foley's been around for ages, as in, it's been used from even when there was just radio, and it would literally be someone in the room. So there'd be a scene, they'd be doing a radio drama, and a person would be like, so-and-so just walked in the room, and they literally have a little mini door that has a lock and a handle, and you'll hear them stomp on the ground, and, they'll have like weird sound effects and a cymbal, when someone falls over, but they perform sound effects. So Foley hasn't changed much in the sense that it's more the performance side of sound editing or sound effects. And so they'll do things like footsteps. They might do cloth or clothes shuffling, or, if someone moves a blanket off them, it'll do that. They'll do more props, so even splashing water and stuff. So if someone falls in a pool, they might have giant pool and a big broom or something, and they'll be swishing the water around as the person moves their arms. So it's all
quite smart.
times.
So they don't actually have to be in the pool.
No, that's true. You could, like they might want to be. But, they'll have pits, these concrete pits, and they're full of different stuff. So there'll be a pit for, we might have carpet on it. There'll be a wood pit. There'll be a concrete. There'll be one with gravel and bits. I don't know. There's different techniques.
Is this so like when you need footsteps and walking, they can walk on the spot and get those sounds?
Yeah. So they're literally standing on the spot, and you'll see, grown men in high heels walking on wood, and they'll be like scraping their foot. And so they perform it with the actor. So if the actor, does a sharp stop, there might be a scrape, and they'll perform that. And so it's quicker.
So they're watching the scene. It's like on a screen in front of them. They watch it and then they go, all right, cool, let's do a take. And they will re-perform that for the audio.
Yeah, exactly. So the spotting session will give everyone the notes of what needs to be where. And obviously like the Foley recordists may have sync stuff up. So they have like, depending on the situation and how serious it is, sometimes they have indicators on the screen for timing, which they do for ADR. So there'll be like a bar that goes across the screen or something. And as it hits the end, that's when you start your line or the text or whatever. Sometimes they do that in Foley. Other times they just play the scene and they'll perform different things. But Foley's great because obviously it's more organic and it's timed with the picture. And, they'll have literally a big shed of crap and the different types of shoes. So you get the different weights of like a heavier shoe or a sneaker. They'll have bags. So a lot of times if you watch a scene where there's a horse, you might have the person riding the horse and they'll have chainmail or the horse, what do you call it? The horse reins and the leather of the saddle and the feet banging the sides. Then the horse himself, like they literally get like coconuts and they on the ground. They literally act out, sword fights. They might do all the sword clinks and the pulling the sword out. So, you can find that stuff in libraries, but it's a lot quicker and easier if they just grab all their props and perform a bunch of that stuff. And it's recorded nice and clean.
So Lord of the Rings must have taken a long time to make.
Yes. With
all those swords and battles and horses.
And obviously they can reuse a lot of, a couple of the sounds here and there or whatever, but obviously it's just easier to perform lots of different hits rather than copy and paste the sound and move the sounds around. It's easy just to perform them all in one hit or, multiple hits, multiple passes, So that's Foley. So there's a Foley team. So there might be like multiple performers in the Foley stage. There'll be the Foley recordist. There'll be a Foley editor. And they may pre-mix as well, so they might do a bit of a balance of the stuff before it gets sent to the final mixer, which we'll get to. Then there's obviously sound editors. There'll be multiple sound editors on a bigger budget, and they will be probably, they would have gone and gathered sounds as we talked about in pre-production or in production. They might have gathered sounds knowing that there's going to be certain fight scenes or whatever it might be. They'll go out or even record cars. They might go out and record cars, but that's not Foley because a car isn't performed to picture.
So that's sound design is when...
Well, it's sound editing. This is still, editing. I would say what we call sound editors. This is still sort of sound editors. So you'll go out in the car that is on the picture, preferably. You get the exact car, and they may take it off set. So once the car's been shot, they'll go out with a sound editor. They'll get someone who's good at driving to literally just, burn around, do takeoff, slow down. They'll record multiple mics. So they might have some in the engine, on the exhaust, inside the car, up the driver's bottom. No, I don't know. They just literally have mics everywhere, and they'll just get them to scream around. And then they'll also be, the sound recordist will be, or it's sound editor, but they're a sound recordist as well. They'll be standing on the road as the car goes meow, meow, or they might be recording as it burns off and skids off. So they record all that stuff and just have this massive library of that car.
No one's going to be able to see the Fast and Furious the same way now.
Thinking about a mic up there.
No. Thinking about how many sounds are in that and how many different cars, and it's every time the camera cuts, the car sounds different, and every gear change needs to be synced up, and it's a lot of work.
It is, and this is the thing, and why their budgets are like 100 million or whatever, like stupid money, because it may take a sound team a year to, or months to record all the different cars that are in that film, and they'll record everything, and then someone's got to go through it all. Someone has to literally go through the hours of recording and get all those different sounds, cut them up. They might have 10 mics on the car, so you've got all this stuff to balance. So it's so much work, but it's also so much content that has to go in this film, and it's got to be synced up perfectly so it is convincing to the eye that gear change is in sync, that the revs follow the way the car moves in the scene. Like, It is a lot of work. So that's what a sound editor does, and you would have a lot of team, big team of that doing the recordings. They'll go back and do all their edits and stuff. Then there's sound designers. Now, one issue we have, am I boring you? I feel like I've talked way too much.
No, this is good. This is good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So what we have, this is we'll talk about something you're more knowledgeable in next time so you can just dominate the talking. So a sound designer it's good though because I'm excited. So I feel like, we're getting the
I'm having
fun.
I'm having fun.
Great.
Keep going.
So sound designer, which unfortunately, because it's the cool name, sound designer sounds cool.
I'm the sound designer.
Yeah. So I don't think we've even talked about audio post-production. So we've said post-production. So audio post-production is everything that's in post-production, right? This is what we call
everything audio.
Is audio post-production. Unfortunately, what most people, including like directors who should know better, they call us audio post-production, I call it specialists or whatever, but the audio post-production team, they just call us sound designers. If you do anything in post-audio, you're a sound designer, which I know
it's
there's
funny
a lot
because
of,
I've made that mistake before signing on to a job. Yeah. They're like, we're looking for a sound designer, and then they start sending you some of the brief. You're like, that's not quite what I thought
and
was
this is
coming
the
my way.
problem that gets confusing because they're like, we need a sound designer. And every single time I respond, do you need someone to do the dialogue editing and clean up the sound effects and the mix? And they're like, yes. I go, okay, so you don't need a sound designer. That's like one aspect. But I don't like correct them brutally because I wouldn't get the job, but I just inform them. Or it's more about knowing what they actually want, and it's never just sound design. It's very rare that anyone would come to me and say, I want you as a sound designer, and they actually want a sound designer.
It's helpful to know so you can quote for the job as well too.
Yeah,
right?
it's true. So, but a sound designer, and this is traditionally a sound designer, is someone who designs sound.
No way.
Yes, yeah. So, what we've talked about so far is a lot more like you don't have a video editor. A video designer. You have a video editor, right? So they get footage and they edit it. They chop it up, zoom it in, pull it out, whatever. That's what a sound editor does. They might record sounds or they get pre-existing sounds from a different sound library, which is someone else may build it, or they might download the sounds off the internet, whatever it is. And you are a sound editor. You put it in sync with the shot. You might, do stuff to the sound a little bit, treat it, but it might be like you clean it up or whatever, take out some noise. But it's not designing a sound. You're just editing it into the picture so it fits and it's balanced or whatever. But a sound designer is someone who creates a spaceship that doesn't exist. So,
so sci-fi
Star Wars
and movies like that and
particularly for sci-fi and
would
horror.
have a lot of sound designers, right? Because there's a lot more to make.
So like horror films and stuff, they pull out weird monster sounds or eerie stuff. There's things that tend to be not of this world, or they use tools like they might even use a synth or some sort of like keyboard, or they, I think an example. So I remember watching the behind the scenes for one of the Star Wars. I think it was one of the early, like number one when they did Phantom Menace. And they wanted to make a sound for those tanks, the floating tanks that come over the hill where the robots, you remember? Anyway, I'm trying to remember if this is correct because I saw it so long ago. They got a round metal bowl and they got a beard shaver, like a
beard trimmer,
and they ran it around the inside of the bowl and recorded the sound or vibrations from that. And then they probably manipulated it with plugins. But that is being a sound designer. You're literally like, there's a few guys out there that do this kind of stuff. It's where
interesting.
I've
got a story as well. But so keep saying what you're saying, and then I'll come back to it.
No, I'll just that was my story. But so they record that sound that kind of gets that weird. You'll have to go back and find the video where they talk about it. But the way they vibrated the beard trimmer thing onto this bowl, then they probably did some post-processing with like a modulator or some weird plugins that manipulate the sound even more. But that is what sound design is, where you get a synth sound and you run it through some plugins and you add some distortion and you might put a flanger, if people know what that is, or whatever it is. Like you design a sound from like not from nothing, but just
something that isn't what it is.
Yeah, exactly what it was intended for. Even all right, quick example is this. I'm going to steal this one from you. The blasters in Star Wars. Star Wars is always great examples. The blasters in Star Wars literally is so you know power lines, how they've got the like cross beam wires that come down. So a massive power, a big power pole, whatever you call it, they'll have the big supporting side beams, which are just massive, big, chunky wires that are bolted to the ground. They just got a ratchet or something and banged it on that, and it did this pew kind of sound, the Star Wars sound. And when they hit it, it just sounded cool. Like you heard that pew, and they just put a mic. It might have been a mic that they stuck on the thing that gets the kind of the contact mic is what they're called. Or I can't remember which mic they used, but that's how they got the sound for a blaster. And so it's far from a laser gun.
It's very cool. I'll tell you my quick story. So I was...
Please do.
I saw a video of behind the scenes making of Alien vs Predator, and I can't remember the sound designer's name, but he was talking about in an interview about coming up with some of the creature sounds. And he was having a barbecue on a Sunday with the family and friends, and he was in his kitchen marinating a bowl of chicken with like barbecue sauce or whatever. And all of a sudden thought to himself as he's hearing this chicken being marinated, this could be something. And he apparently just there and then grabbed the chicken, went to his home studio and started recording him mixing this bowl of chicken, which obviously would have sounded like kind of moist, chickeny, fleshy sounds.
It'd be a bit clicky.
A bit clicky and a bit gluggy. I don't know if that as a word. And apparently he was gone for about half an hour, and his wife at the time came into looking for him, came into the studio like, what are you doing with the chicken? And he's just like, I've just had this idea. And what he did was he recorded multiple layers of this chicken, and he pitched it lower and stretched the sound out and did all these manipulations to the sound that ends up being some of the creatures in Alien vs Predator. And it all came from marinating some chicken on a Sunday afternoon barbecue.
So that is sound design there. Yeah.
At its greatest.
Unfortunately, too many even audio post people just call themselves sound designers, and in credits, most of the time you'll see sound designer, and that tends to be they've done everything or whatever. But a sound designer is those examples. That is actually designing a sound. And sound editors could be a sound designer. Sometimes you might have someone who's more – there's guys out there that are just freaks at that kind of thing. They just, try, they experiment. They just know how to manipulate things, whether it's getting a violin bow and rubbing it on random objects and it just vibrates and does weird crap, and they record that, put it in their computer and just manipulate the crap out of it. There's people who that's what they do and that's what they love. And it's something I've always wondered about getting into, but I don't know if I'm creative enough in that sense. But I think a lot of it's just experimenting.
I think the more you do it, the more creative you'll become it too, as well, for sure.
So anyway, so that's a sound editor. I think we got to rush through this. We're taking forever. And then after that, hopefully I haven't missed anything, is your re-recording mixer. So, which was also used to be called dubbing mixer, but I think they're mostly calling themselves re-recording mixer. The reason they call them re-recording mixer is so what they'll do is, and I think it's based off like the older technique of bringing all the things together. They mix and balance, put reverb on things, make it all feel great. And they re-record all of the project or all of the film. It used to be onto tape or, does that make sense? So you record what you've mixed and balanced as the, final thing onto the tape. And so they called them re-recording mixers. And they're the person who, actually I've skipped some. I've been a pain. Obviously, composers, there are music. Yeah, I've got to go back.
Thanks for skipping my department.
No. Well, I thought we're doing sound. I know composing is sound, but that's a different beast.
It's
but
okay.
Within that beast,
I'll forgive you.
Yeah, well, I've forgotten other people in the whole music department, really. So you've got your composers. They could be a team, but then there'll be a score recorder. Sometimes that's the composer if they're a small person, like they have their own studio recording sounds, but they might record orchestras. There's a score mixer or a music mixer. They'll pre-mix the score and, give it to the re-recording mixer in some sort of form that is easy for them to work with, generally in surround sound or Dolby Atmos. Then there's a music editor. So sometimes there's music tracks. So it might be pop tracks or it might be a track that's playing on the radio in the car. Those kind of things, a music editor. And even sometimes the music editor might edit the score after the fact. So they might cut a scene out or cut a bit of a scene out, and they have to make sure the score blends nicely.
Sure.
So there's that. And they obviously then hand on to re-recording mixer. So I feel bad I skipped them. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. I'm sure we've skipped lots of individual people in all these teams. So we're just giving you an overview to follow
there's always
along,
assistants and other people. Of course. There's actually an important one that I have missed is a supervising sound editor. They tend to get big credit because that's a person who would be the one mostly working with the director, probably doing a spotting session. They're the one who makes sure all the teams are doing their thing. So supervising sound editor to make sure the Foley team are keeping up to date, they're on time. They may be a sound editor themselves. They might have little minion sound editors going, capturing sounds. They're the ones that go through it, put it in and all that sort of stuff. So supervising sound editor, which, I put that as a credit sometimes when I've got a team working for me, rather than just calling myself just another whatever. Because also the problem is for me, a lot of films I work on, I'm all of them. So it's kind of annoying when you're like, dialogue editor, Ben Knop, ADR recorders, Ben Knop, it just looks crap. So sometimes I bottle those up into one or whatever. So anyway, the re-recording mixer is a really important one because a lot of the creative decisions are made there as well. So at that point, your dialogue's generally sounding great, because the dialogue editor has done a great job of cleaning it and balancing it all out. But the re-recording mixer might then make decisions on, do we pan it around? So if the camera moves, or the person walks off set, so do we pan it that way or whatever? They will maybe do some extra dialogue cleaning depending on if there's mistakes. Because once you get to the mixing room or, a lot of sound dialogue editors might wear headphones because it's good for precision. But when you listen to it through the big theater that they're mixing in, it may not work or whatever. So they might do some re-EQing, and they'll EQ is equalization. So that's where they like brighten it up or make it sound
change
fatter.
the tonal balance of the
tonal
sound.
balance, yes. But they'll get all the elements. So they make the decisions on how loud the dialogue is going to be compared to, say, the sound effects or the ambience, or there's lots of creative decisions.
So they're receiving all the files from the whole sound team from all the different areas and mixing it all together and deciding what's going to take the attention for what moment, what's going to be background, what's going to be foreground.
Where things are going to be around the room, so the score might be a bit further mixed into the surrounds because they want the dialogue to stand out. But sometimes they make big decisions. Depending on the film, they may have already made these decisions, but sometimes they might be playing with a scene and they're like, how about in this bit we just don't have any sound effects, or let's not have any score, whatever it might be. They might just in the moment have some inspiration and say, how about we just like take everything out and just have the score, and they'll play with that stuff in the room and see what works. Some, depending on the film, that may have already been decided, but that I as a smaller studio and budget films, some of those decisions I may have got my sound guys or myself to just build up a whole scene, and the director's like, oh, I didn't tell you this before, but I was thinking this would be just music. And then they might, and then you just try it and you go, yeah, actually it works. It adds emotion, or, those are the decisions. That's right.
It happens with music as well. Sometimes you write a piece of music and they say, oh, I thought this would be silent, actually.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, great. I'll just put this out the back.
Yeah, but it's definitely a lot of like just deciding, what is going to be the focal point when it comes to sound, where things are going to be balanced. It'll be bringing things together. So using reverbs in, if you've got a scene where it's in a giant cave, it may be at that point. Sometimes a lot of that stuff may have been pre-done, like they do pre-dubs or like pre-mixing. But at least in that scenario, it's like, let's decide how much of this cave reverb do we need in this cave, or
it's kind of the last listen, isn't it? It's like the last pass of dialing everything in and making it sound good and immersive.
Yeah, and convincing, and is it what's telling the story? Because sometimes you might have a sound there. It's not always predictable in the sense that you might have a clock or something ticking away because you see it in this shot, or it might be a close-up of the clock, and then you cut out wide to the couple in the room talking, and you'll obviously drop that clock down because you're not right up close to the clock visually. But
so
even
that perspective
clock,
thing as well that you're playing
perspective with. For sure. And that's where you use things like reverbs or EQ, equalization, tonal balance, to make those decisions, to help you, the viewer, focus on something. Because maybe the clock was the important part. It was either giving that sense of maybe it's a change in time, could be months down the line, or the clock is there just to make you, I'm talking about the clock because in Godless, they had a counseling session and there's a clock there, and there's something about that clock and the quietness of everything else that makes it feel awkward, and when they're talking about real serious stuff, it's a great storyteller thing, but then as they're talking, you don't need that clock there anymore. People have already had that moment.
It would be quite annoying, I think, for this clock to be loud and ticking for a whole scene too.
You just slowly fade that away. No one's going to notice it. No one's going to go, oh, where'd the clock go? Or you bring it back in a certain time because it fills the gap that you really want people to go, oh, wait, there's that clock. Oh, yeah, this is awkward. Whatever it is to feel the emotions you want to, and there's obviously issues at this point. You would have thought that your composer and your sound team have worked well together. But this is the issues where, like, if they don't work together, maybe there's a big explosion, right? And the composer's just like crescendoed and have this massive bass bomb and right at the moment of the explosion. But the mixer then has to go, all right, well, the explosion's taking up all the big low energy of the mix.
In the subs.
That big sub kick doesn't, it just adds to it, and they're both making each other redundant, like the phasing issue we're talking about.
It does come into the importance of working in the team together to decide, is this a music moment? Is this a sound design moment? Who's going to take the priority in things?
And good director will direct that, so they'll be able to maybe know what's going on between the teams and say, this is your moment, this is your moment. Like, I've worked with a composer recently, and he was awesome in that, like, he would do a lot of, in those moments in a fight scene, and there's lots of like heavy punches or whatever, he would stick with the higher frequency stuff, or, that big crashing moment, he would build up, but it would be like building up high screechy strings, and it crescendos and drops at that big exploding moment, so it's doing stuff like that. That if you've got a great team working together, they work that stuff out. But if they haven't, as a mixer, you just go, all right, well, for me, as I said before with the score, if I'm sent the stems or all the individual tracks that have been pre-mixed either by the composer or a sound mixer, if I had the stems, all I could do is go, all right, well, that big bass bomb or big bass drum hit, I just take it out. So I could just mix that part of the score out. I don't have to lose all the other cool things that are happening in that moment. And that's why I say to composers all the time, when I ask them for stems or individual tracks, they're like, oh, no, I don't want you to ruin my mix. And I say to them, I'm not going to touch your mix, obviously, unless the story calls for it. But I explain to them, this is the process, in the sense that, would you rather I duck that one instrument that sounds too much like a sound design thing, or is impeding the ability to hear the dialogue? They might just have a tonally thing, that is string thing, or something that's right at the frequency of the dialogue, and you can't hear the dialogue. Would you rather I just turn that thing down just for that moment, or just get your whole score and go, see you later, and mix it out?
It does happen.
And
it does happen.
So, but I say to them, what would you rather? And I say to them every time, I'm like, It's going to be a decision that the director makes. And, you know, a lot of the times I'll say, you can check it, you know, I'll talk to you about it. And a lot of the times I don't have to do that anyway, because generally, like the whole last film that I worked on, Godless again, I got all the stems but didn't use them. The mixer did such a great job of the score that I only used the surround stems that the surround masters that he gave me. Obviously, I still dipped it based off what was happening in the scene, but he did a great job mixing it, and I didn't feel the need in any moment to just be like, let's pull this thing out or whatever. And that was also because the composer did such a good job, because his arrangements left room for the sound effects and they just worked with every scene. So, you know, it just, all the stars aligned and it worked really well. So I've talked way too much. Have you got any questions?
Yeah, I do.
Do you want to add anything?
I've got a question about small budget films versus big budget films. So obviously we've just mentioned a lot of people, but not every film or TV show has the budget to employ this many people just on the sound team. So keep in mind, everything we just spoke about is just the sound team. So it can be quite expensive making this stuff. How does that differ with a small team versus a large team in the sound department? You know,
I do everything.
So yeah, so you got people wearing multiple hats and taking on multiple roles.
Yeah,
I assume.
So it tends to be in the US, because that's where obviously a lot of films are made. In the US, it's very much like you do your job and that's it. You know, like you're a sound recorder or boom operator. You don't touch my mixer, all right? You touch your boom and that's it. That sounded a bit inappropriate. But, you know, it very much like, you know, you work your way up the ranks doing certain things, and, you know, it's everyone has their separate roles and you don't tread on each other's feet. And I'm sure, like, you know, that's not in every situation. That's probably more in the upper budget stuff. In Australia, we tend to be more one-stop shops. You know, there's composers who say they're sound designers as well and sound editors, and they'll do it all. The danger of doing everything yourself is there's no collaboration. There's no other brains. You do things too much the same all the time. You know, it's the same with mixing and mastering with music. A good mixer will want someone else to master their track because they want some fresh ears on it and a fresh perspective of the track. And it's the same, you know, with the sound team, is having that fresh perspective is great. Like, so more and more I'm trying, especially even if the budget's not great, if the project's big, one thing I actually find is I get fatigued. So I do tend to be a one-stop shop. I tend to always do my dialogue editing because I think I'm pretty good at it, as well as the mixing. And I try and outsource this Foley and sound design as much as I can. And it worked really, like, honestly, my only good example is, so Godless is the first time I had 5 people, I think, help me in the end. And it was so good. And like, not only did they, between all of them, do a stellar job, the fact that I didn't have to do the work was great. As in, you know, it was a massive film, you know, with a reasonably short timeline. Budget was okay, but it was a big film, and it would have been half as good if I only, because I didn't have enough time. If I just did everything myself, we wouldn't have got there. And it would have meant I couldn't spend more time on the dialogue and all that sort of stuff. So the one thing that I was going to say about fatigue is when I work on a whole film myself, if I've done all the dialogue editing and added all the sound effects and got the score in and started fixing that and whatever, and then I go to mixing, I tend to have run out of time. But mixing is what I love doing the most. Bringing it all together is what I love doing the most. But it tends to be, I kind of mix on the way and then just do a quick final mix to get it over the line. And I don't want it to be that way. I want to get fresh ears. You know, I don't mind so much doing the dialogue editing, but I like the idea that I get these fresh sounds. I get to then bring them in how I want and manipulate them a bit more, and, you know, whatever it might be. Or particularly, so the last film, I had guys, because we were in such a rush sort of near the end, I just say, I'd do a spotting session. I'd just be like, oh, this scene, we quickly need this, this, and this, and this. And then 2 of the guys would send me back the exact same sound, like not same sounds, but they'd do the same sections. And then I had 2 options. So I could be like, oh, that one sounds good, that one not so much. Or, you know, this one, I'm going to blend the two of them. Or one of them had a different perspective on that moment and they might have brought in different elements the other person didn't. So I had all this option and flavor to work with, right? And so I love that because then I as someone who I think I've got good ears, could then choose how to make that work. But I didn't have to go out and record all the sounds or source them from libraries. You know, a lot of times they record them themselves. So they took the time because they had it to record the sounds, where a lot of the times I'm rushing. So I'm just like, I don't have the time to set up a mic and go out and get 20 different sounds. I just go into my sound library that I spent good money on and go, I need a car door shut, or, you know, and this and that. And I'll just quickly find the 20 sounds that I need, slap them in, and they're already being used on other libraries and things because they're not unique to me, where these guys got to record those sounds and I get to chuck them in,
it's a bit more special.
But the low budget thing tends to be the case for most people in my field of work, especially in Australia. We just do it all. It's literally, here's my film, make it sound good and give it back to me. And or other people would just do the whole lot. Because it tends to be that budget wise, it's probably just, rather than employing other people and losing all the money you got, it's easy just to do it yourself. So you'll clean up the dialogue, put the sounds you can in, give it a quick balance, and off you send it, you know.
Makes sense.
So, yeah.
All right, Ben's top tip for the day. I've got a question for you.
Okay.
So if someone was listening at this point in the podcast and they still want to know more about the sound for film.
I'd be surprised if they're still listening. I feel like we lost them at 5 minutes, but anyway, yeah.
Yeah. If they want to learn more. So someone's found this really interesting and they want to know more and see some stuff about how sound is made and managed and designed in films. How does one learn more about it?
Yep. So 2 places. YouTube.
Yep.
We've already talked about YouTube because it's just bloody great.
You can learn a lot of stuff from YouTube. What
so you want to search for behind the scenes, or if you find a particular film you want to know more about, if you just search for the sound team or sound designer, or literally just put the title in, or like quickly Google. So there's IMDb, and you can search for any film and it lists the credits on there. So you can, you know, and once you find a sound designer you might like or something, you could search for them, you know, see what other films they've done, but search for that person and maybe put their name, the team. So if it was, who's some sound teams that are famous? You might find a sound company, you know, one of the bigger companies that do sort of cover all sound. You might search for their name as with the film. And you'll just search behind the scenes. It's simple. Behind the scenes, and you'll find videos there. So a lot of, like, back in the day, DVDs used to have behind the scenes, and I used to chew them up. Love it.
I actually often would enjoy them more than the movie.
More than the film, yeah. Well, but Lord of the Rings had like a 12-hour or something stupid, like doco on the process of making the films or something. Like it was huge, and I loved it. Like, even for me as a sound person, learning about all the other departments is amazing. And a lot of those would be on YouTube and stuff as well. So these days, because we don't really buy DVDs or Blu-rays, but if you do or have, go back and pull those Blu-rays and DVDs out, because a lot of times I'll have the special features. So look for the special features. For more of the latest films and stuff, check on the streaming service. So if you're a Disney person, you can find, they tend to always have a behind the scenes or are putting up behind the scenes for stuff. So, you know, Mandalorian has its own, I can't remember what it's called, but if you just look up Mandalorian, it'll come up as one of the videos on there, and you can see the behind the scenes, and they'll cover visual stuff as well. But it's not that hard to search for stuff, whether it's on YouTube or within the streaming service.
YouTube's the way to go, I think.
I encourage people to do it because, they tend to put those things on YouTube anyway because it advertises the film and gets people wanting to watch it. So they tend to put that stuff on YouTube as much as they do on the streaming services. So YouTube is your friend.
Great tip.
Thank you. Thanks for asking.
Well, this was fun. Thanks for explaining.
So sorry. So how long? We've been going for maybe an hour and 20 minutes, and I think I've talked for an hour and 19 of them.
This is great. You're making my job very easy here. but it's been
Well,
really great, and you're giving us some insight around what it takes to do the sound part of a major TV show or film. So thanks for your insight.
Well, clearly I'm passionate because I've not shut up the whole time.
That's right.
My brain goes wild. But thank you for being such a great host and asking the right questions. I really appreciate that. It was good fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Now we need to talk some Ben Co shop, so you can just blast away. But
yeah,
thank you for letting me talk
episode.
lots.
Hey,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
and thanks for letting me talk lots. And I hope people found this interesting.
I'm sure they did. I did. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Sweet, mate.
Cool. Well, I'll catch you next week for another one.
All right. See you then.
Cool. See ya.